Hello everyone, welcome back. We were doing May-June 2023 IGCSE paper 0455, variant 13. All right, MCQ number 16. Now, MCQ number 16 says, what is the reason why firms making similar products sometimes locate near each other? So now in this MCQ, they are asking you, what would be the reason behind firms locating next to their competitors? Why in the same geographical location? Option A says competition is decreased. Option B says there are external economies of scale. C says there are internal economies of scale. D says because of transport costs may be eliminated. So which is the reason you think would be the reason behind firms choosing to situate near each other? Yes, it has to be B. Now, why B? Because the prime reason why firms working of the same industry tend to situate near to each other is because they want to reap benefits of economies of scale. They want to reap benefits of economies of concentration. Why? Because a large industry in this way can enable the firms to reduce their average costs in a number of ways. Competition won't be decreased, competition would be increased. So we can eliminate option A. Internal economies of scale is where the advantages are enjoyed when individual firms are able to reduce their average cost when they grow in their own size. So C is eliminated and transport cost will not be eliminated. In fact, transport cost will be shared because once they are in close proximity to each other, so they make use of external economies of scale. So it has to be B. Why? Because again, like I said earlier, lower long run average cost will result from an entire industry growing in size, right? So the advantages will be available to all the firms in the industry. That is the reason why. So 16 has to be B. All right. Let's move on to number 17. 17 says a government wishes to increase its spending on public goods. Now, the government intends to spend more on the provision of public goods. Which sector should have a spending increase to achieve this? A says education, B says healthcare, C says national defense, and D says railways. Now, if we all can recall, education and healthcare were examples of merit goods, right? So they fall under merit goods. All right. What about national defense? Yes, defense is an example of public goods, right? Now, can anybody recall for me what were public goods? What were the two prime features that would distinguish what a public good is and what is actually not a public good? How would you classify certain products being, certain goods and services being public good or not? Public good is a product which is non-rival and non-excludable. Yes. And it needs to be financed by taxation. Yes. So what about these options? So now when you're matching the definition with these options, what can you conclude? Yes, consumers can actually, you see, if you look at these options, so consumers can be excluded from consuming education, health, and railway. How? By charging a price. So the consumption of such goods, and then furthermore, if you look at it, so the consumption of such goods by one group of people also means that they will not be available for consumption for another group, right? So this means that they do not fulfill the criteria of what? Education, healthcare, and railways. They will not fulfill the criteria of what? Non-excludability and non-rivalry. So those who are going to be able to pay for it, they are going to be the ones who will be enjoying them. And similarly, if education is available for one other person, so it won't be available for the next person. For instance, similarly goes for the health services. Similarly goes for the railway fares, right? So this means apart from these three products, it's only national defense that qualifies to be a public good. Why? Based on the criteria of non-excludability and non-rivalry. Because even if one person is not paying for it, so will the government stop the provision of national defense? No. So defense, street lighting, they are all examples of public goods. Why? Again, because of the criteria of non-excludability and non-rivalry. All right. Just remember that. So 17 has to be C. All right. Number 18. 18 says a government wishes to stimulate economic recovery. Now, the government wishes to ensure that the economic growth is being restored in the economy. And which action will assist it? So they are saying which of these actions will actually be helpful in the government achieving this objective of its. A says decreasing government investment, B says decreasing income tax, C says increasing indirect taxation, and D says increasing interest rates. Now, if we are decreasing government investment, so if the government is decreasing investment, so instead of the recovery, it's actually creating difficulties. So A is going to be eliminated. B says decreasing income tax. Yes, B is the correct answer. Why? Because once the government decides to decrease the level of income tax, it is actually encouraging people to spend. So people will be left with more disposable income. So they will have a higher purchasing power. So it will be an incentive for firms to produce, and similarly, it will be an incentive for workers to stay in employment, right? So productivity levels will be high, and the firms would also be, if its income tax is related to the corporation tax as well, so the firms would be encouraged to repatriate their profits and grow big in sizes, right? So there would be, overall, there would be economic recovery in the economy, right? Increasing indirect taxation and increasing interest rates. Again, when you are increasing the interest rates, you will making it more difficult for people to borrow money and firms to go for expanding their scales of production. So you can eliminate that. Increasing indirect taxation, again, you would be reducing the aggregate demand in the economy. So that would go against your objective of stimulating recovery. So again, you can chop it off. So for 19, it has to be B. All right. I missed number 18. Let's go to 18. We went to 19 first. All right. 18 was which government measure would lead directly to more export of goods. Now they're saying which of the government measures would increase your export of goods. All right. A devaluation of the currency, a restriction of bank credit creation, an increase in the rate of interest, the issue of more banknotes and coins. Now, they're saying which of this government measure would directly lead to an increase in the export of goods. Now, let's look at B first. A restriction of bank credit creation. Now, if there are difficulties in issuing of loan, so this would be a problem for firms who want to expand their scales of production, right? So they won't be able to increase their levels of scales of operation. So how about increasing exports? Obviously, it wouldn't be possible. So B is actually creating difficulties for producers and exporters. So it's not going to increase the exports. In fact, it's going to decrease the level of exports. C says an increase in the rate of interest. Again, if it is costlier now to obtain money from the bank, to obtain loans from the bank, again, producers will be unable to get loans on friendly terms, and they won't be able to expand their levels of operation, and they won't be able to meet the surge in exports. So they won't be able to increase their level of exports. So again, this is going against the objective. So C has to be nullified. All right. Now D says the issuance of more banknotes and coins. Bank issuance of banknotes and coins means this is an example of an expansionary monetary policy, right? So this is an example of an expansionary monetary policy. Now, what will eventually this happen? Yes, the money supply is increasing, and this will eventually lead to increase in the consumer spending. Overall, the investment level will increase, which will eventually lead to the increase in aggregate demand. The output will then increase, but it is indirectly, it will lead to an increase in exports. But they are saying which will directly lead to an export of goods. So this is the reason why, because they wanted it to have a direct impact. This is why the reason we are chopping D off. A devaluation of the currency would actually lead to a direct increase in the export of goods. Why? Because what does a devaluation means? It means that there is a fall in the value of the fixed exchange rate. What does devaluation of the currency mean? There is a fall in the value of a fixed exchange rate, right? So what happens? What happens where the devaluation of your currency is there? Yes, the price of export in terms of foreign currency falls, and the price of imports in terms of domestic currency rises. So what happens? Overall, the demand for the domestic products increase. So hence, your goods will be export competitive, price competitive. So there would be an increase in your export of goods. Hence, 18 has to be A. All right. Number 20. What is most likely effect on an economy of a successful supply side policy? Now, we all know supply side policy aims to increase the aggregate supply in the economy, right? So, which of the options is the most suitable one? Come on, it's so easy. A says an increase in the general price level, an increase in the interest rate, an increase in the money supply, an increase in the potential GDP. Yes, 20 has to be D. An increase in the general price level is an increase in the level of in the general price level. The inflation is rising. No, that would not be possible. Increase in the interest rate, again, that would be creating difficulties. Increase in the money supply and expansionary monetary policy. The correct option has to be increase in the potential GDP when we are aiming at increasing the productive potential of the economy. So 20 has to be D. It gets so easy once your definitions are crystal clear and once your concepts are crystal clear, you can exactly match the answers there and then only. All right. Number 21 says a country is experiencing high economic growth caused by an increase in consumer spending. Now the country is actually going through a high levels of economic growth, and the reason behind high levels of economic growth is a surge in consumer spending. Now, the consumer spending is overall increasing, which is the reason why the country is experiencing economic growth. Now, they're saying what are the most likely effects on inflation and unemployment. Now, they're saying due to this high level of economic growth, what should be the impact on inflation and unemployment both? Now, bear in mind, consumer spending is increasing. Now, again, when consumer spending is increasing, what should happen? Too much money chasing too few goods? Yes. So, when spending increases, what happens? The inflation level has to be high. So, you can automatically chop wherever inflation falls is written. You can chop A, you can chop B because the first situation is not satisfied. Now, when economic growth is being experienced in the economy, what happens? You are making use of the more and more of factors of production. You're making use of the resources. So what happens with the level of employment? The employment level increases, and so the unemployment level should fall, right? So inflation has to rise and the level of unemployment has to fall. So 21 has to be C. This is how both the situations needs to be satisfied. So 21, C. Hope this is clear. Number 22. All right. 22 says which pair is most likely to be provided by the private sector in a mixed economy. Now they are saying which of both of these items mentioned are going to be the responsibility of the private sector if it's a mixed economy. All right. Courts and prisons, hospitals and tax collection, insurance and banks, weapon manufacture and defense. Now, a private sector in a mixed economy, again, it would go for the provision of those goods and services where it has its own incentive, right? Court and prisons would be provided by the public sector. Hospitals and tax collection, again, the responsibility of the public sector. Weapon manufacture and defense, again, the public sector. So it has to be insurance and banks. So 22 has to be C. Easy peasy. All right, 23. An economy is experiencing a sustained fall in the general price level. Which term is used to describe this? I can see so many people jumping off their seats because we just did it a paper back. Exactly. Yes, it has to be deflation. I'm so glad you can recall it. Deflation is negative inflation. Yes, a sustained fall in the prices of goods and services. Exactly. So it's a sustained fall in the general price level, sustained fall in the prices of goods and services, negative inflation. See how it gets so easy when you have the definition there in your mind. You can easily match the option with the definition. 23 has to be A. All right, but still I'm going to explain why it can't be the remaining options. Depreciation. Who's going to recall me what was depreciation? Yes. Depreciation is the value of capital goods being worn out or becoming obsolete, right? So it cannot be depreciation. Depreciation has nothing to do with the general price level. Market disequilibrium, again, when the demand is not meeting supply, either there is excess demand or excess supply, right? Recession, again, we know that's a reduction in the real GDP over a period of 6 months or more for 2 successive quarters, right? So it's not recession. So 23 has to be A. So again, by definition and again by Logic, I've shown you why 23 has to be A. All right, 24. 24 says what is most likely to cause an increase in relative poverty. All right, now just seeing why would there be an increase in relative poverty? What was relative poverty? Yes, relative poverty was a situation, it was a condition where people are poor in comparison to others, right? Their income is still too low to actually enable them to enjoy the average standard of living in their country, right? So now they are saying what is most likely to cause an increase in relative poverty. So what is going to accentuate this relative poverty level? An increase in state benefits, an increase in the national minimum wage, pension increases below the rate of inflation, people working beyond retirement age. Now you see option A, increase in state benefits. If the government is providing them unemployment benefits, it's going to better off the situation and not worsen off the level of poverty. So it's, you will chop off A because it's not making sense in this scenario. B says an increase in the national minimum wage. So if the government increases the level of the minimum wage, so it's going to better off the people and not worsen off. So it's not going to increase relative poverty, rather it's going to reduce the level of poverty. So you will chop B off. D says people working beyond retirement age. So if people are still working beyond retirement age, they are going to make use of a sizable income. So they're going to be better off, enjoying better quality of life. So they will not be in poverty level. Poverty level has to reduce in that case. So D again has to be chopped off. It has to be C. Pension increases below the rate of inflation. Why? Because people are not going to be better off in real terms. Because even though the pension is increasing, but yet it's still behind the rate of inflation. So they're not going to be better off. They're going to be worse off because the value of money will fall. Right? So 24 has to be C. All right. Let's look at 25. What might explain the high population growth in some developing countries? Now they are saying what might explain the high population growth in some developing countries? High birth rates and falling death rates, low immigration and high immigration, falling birth rates and rising death rates, falling life expectancy. So now why would there be high population growth in some developing countries? Now you look at option B, C and D. B, C and D all are decreasing the level of population. A low immigration rate means less people are uh, coming into your country, more people are going out. So it would actually be reducing the level of population and not increasing it. So you chop it off. If the birth rates are falling and the death rates are rising again, so your population level is reducing. So it won't be causing an increase. So again, eliminated. Falling life expectancy. If the life expectancy is falling and people are living for a lesser age duration in your country, so again, the population has to fall and not to increase. So D again has to be chopped off. Yes, it has to be A. Why? Because when the birth rates are rising and the death rates are falling, so the population is going to grow. 25 has to be A. All right, number 26. Number 26 says which combination of factors might cause a country to be classified as developing rather than developed. Now they've given you two uh, factors and they're saying which of the combination of two factors would actually make you justify that these are the characteristics of a developing country rather than the country being developed. All right, so let's have a look at them. A says a government budget deficit and a low debt rate. Now, what's a budget deficit? Budget deficit is when the government's revenue are lesser than the expenditure, right? So, a budget deficit doesn't necessarily have to be a characteristic present in a developing country. It could also be a situation in a developed country where the government is spending more and is getting less by way of its taxation, right? So it's spending more and earning less in revenue, causing it to have a budget deficit. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the characteristic of a developing country. It can be present in developed nation as well. Yes, it's a low death rate. It could be the characteristic of the developed country. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in developing. So you can chop A off. B says a high birth rate and a low death rate. Okay, if it has to be a developing country, so the death rate also has to be high. So you can chop B off because of this. Because you need to satisfy both the factors. C says a large population and a current account deficit. Okay, if the population is large, yes, that can be the characteristic of a developing nation, but a current account deficit doesn't necessarily have to be in a developing nation. It could even be a situation witnessed by a developed country too. So 26 has to be chopped off. Yes, it has to be D. Correct. I'm glad you figured that out. Why? Because it's a poor education system combined with a low standard of living. What does that mean? That means that the real GDP per head is falling. The quality of life is falling. The real GDP per head is falling. The quality of life is falling, which would classify that yes, these characteristics would make up a developing country. You can attribute it to a developing country. So 26 has to be D. Hope this is clear. I'm presenting you the reasoning so that you understand. That's my prime aim in discussing it at length. Otherwise, I can just go on quickly, but then I'm glad I'm ensuring that you all are understanding it by reasoning. All right, 27 says, what is certain to encourage a higher level of international trade? So in order to promote a higher level of international trade, what is certain? Conservation of resources in unstable exchanges. Now, yes, you are making sure that your natural resources are not being depleted in option A, but yet if this exchange rates are highly volatile, if they are highly fluctuating, so the international trade, there would remain a level of uncertainty and you cannot promote international trade, so you will chop A off. B says exploitation of resources and wider use of quotas. Both the situation are negating a situation of international trade. If you are exploiting your resources, if you are using them at a rate faster than which you could re-equip them, and you are imposing quotas, you're imposing limits on the quantity, on the volume of imports, so you're restricting international trade and you're not promoting international trade, so you're going to chop B off. C says increase support for home industries and increase tariffs. All right, if you're supporting your home industries, your domestic industries, but you are at the same time imposing tariffs, you're imposing taxes on imports. So again, you're restricting international trade, you're not promoting it. So again, it's chopped off. D says more specialization and falling transport costs. Yes, when you are promoting specialization, which is what the concentration on particular products and tasks. So you will be increasing your production level, you will be promoting productivity, you'll be giving rise to efficiency, you will be increasing the aggregate production. And when the transport levels are falling, it will be easier to ship your goods by way of freight, by way of road, by way of railways. So you will be promoting international trade, right? Producers will be willing to sell their surplus. There will be more international trade taking place, right? Encouragement of international trade. So 27 has to be D. All right. 28. 28 says the import of a product from another country has been banned. Now they have imposed a ban. So now they're saying which term describes this method of production. So instead of a ban, what term can you use? Yes, it has to be embargo. Excellent. Why? Because we all know embargo is what? A ban on imports or exports, right? Why can't it be tariff? Because tariff is a tax on imported goods. Tariff is a tax on imported goods. For example, customs duty or import duty, so it cannot be tariff. What was quota? Yes, a limit on the amount of volume of imports, right? Exchange control. What was exchange control? A limit on the amount of foreign currency that can be obtained. It cannot be exchange control as well, right? Either ways, by way of logic, by way of the definition recalling, 28 has to be A. All right, 29. A developing country's two major sources of income from international trade are fishing and tourism. All right, so it's a developing country, and by way of fishing and tourism, it is earning its export revenues. So they're saying if the country's exchange rate depreciated, what is likely to happen? So now they're saying if the country's exchange rate depreciated, what is likely to happen? A says imported goods would become cheaper for local people. No, it has to be the other situation. Remember what was depreciation? We just did it in the MCQ back. Yes, when the exchange rate is depreciating, that means that there's a fall in the value of the exchange rate. So what would happen? The price of exports in terms of foreign currency would fall, and the price of imports in terms of domestic currency would rise. So the price of imports in terms of domestic currency would rise, so imports would become expensive. So you will chop it off. B says the country would definitely become poorer. No, this cannot be the situation. C says the price of fish sold as exports would become cheaper. Yes. Why? Because we all know that once the currency gets there's a fall in the value of the exchange rate, when the currency is depreciated, what happens? That the price of export in terms of foreign currency falls. So your exports are going to get cheaper. So 29 has to be C. D says tourists or countries would be discouraged by higher prices. No, the prices would be falling because the currency is depreciation. Tourists would be inclined. 29, D can be nullified. So for 29, it has to be C. The exports is going to get cheaper. 30. What is the correct formula? Correct formula for calculating the current account balance of payment? Yes, we all know there are 4 components of the balance of payment: the trade in goods, the trade in services, the primary income, and secondary income. And what you need to do in order to arrive at the amount, derive the amount of the current account balance of payment? Yes, you need to add in the balance of trade in goods, the balance of trade in services, the primary income balance, and the secondary income balance. So 30 has to be A. We all know what was the trade in goods. I'm just using this MCQ to recall it for you. Trade in goods was when the value of exported goods and the value of imported goods, this component deals, right? The value of exported goods and the value of imported goods. And the revenue from the export of goods, you subtract it from the expenditure on the import of goods to arrive at the balance of trade in goods. Similarly, for the balance of trade in services, you subtract the value of exported services with the value of imported services to arrive at the balance of trade in services. Primary income was what? Income earned by people and firms, right? Again, it had 2 categories: compensation of employees and investment income, right? Secondary income was what? Transfers of money, goods or services sent out of the country or which come into the country, right? Not in exchange, in return for anything else. They included what? Donations and remittances and gifts, right? All right. So Alhamdulillah, this brings us to the end of the paper, May, June 2023. I hope you all understood and you all enjoyed. Let me know to just see your suggestions and comments. Which papers do you all want me to continue with? Stay tuned. Happy learning. Take care.